Dana Perino, one of the most trusted and unshakable voices in American media, has spent decades shaping the nation's conversation, from the charged, chaotic halls of the White House briefing room to powerhouse programs like The Five and America's Newsroom. To millions, she is the calm at the center of every storm. The woman who stood behind the podium during the most turbulent moments with a composure that felt almost superhuman. Yet few remember that this extraordinary woman began her life far from power. In a small Wyoming town, raised without privilege, forging her path to Washington through discipline, grit, and a steel-hard will that no spotlight could ever create. And now, at 53, behind the radiant smile America loves, Dana faces a chapter more painful than any media battle she has ever fought. A chapter covered in quiet losses and wounds only her heart truly understands. Before we begin, please take a moment to like this video as a gesture of respect for the woman who rose from obscurity to become a pillar of a nation, and who now stands face to face with a darkness no camera has ever been able to capture. Grief rarely shows. It creeps in quietly, like the Wyoming wind that molded Dana Perino's fragile early years. Born on May 9, 1972, in Evanston, a town so quiet that even the silence feels bruised by the cold, the young girl entered a world where resilience wasn't taught, but inhaled, breath by breath, as if the land itself urged her to learn to endure what she didn't yet understand. The sky above her stretched out in a harsh, almost unforgiving beauty, a vastness that made a small child feel both sheltered and unbearable under the weight of existence. She only lived there until she was 2, but in those short years, the land imprinted its initials on her, its solitude, its patience, its quiet demand that even the smallest souls learn to endure the wind. Long before the girl knew the word grief, she felt it in her bones, in the way the wind never stopped, in the way the horizon receded no matter how bravely one pursued it. "Wyoming lives in my bones," the young woman whispered years later, remembering a home she could not quite remember, but could not quite leave. A place she loved as a girl, a place she lost, a place that taught her too early that life can rip you from what defines you before you know how to hold on. When her family moved to Denver, Colorado, Dana stepped into a childhood shaped by modest means and quiet expectations. The Perino home was never wealthy or loud. It was a place where responsibility was carried without complaint, where silence trained the heart more than words ever could. Her father, Leo, became her first mentor, unfolding the newspaper each night, teaching her that the world revealed itself only to those who paid attention, and that her voice, however small, mattered. Her mother, steady and warm, taught her the other half of survival: emotional discipline, order amid uncertainty, the strength to endure without applause. Looking back, Dana understood that these lessons, once invisible, became the spine of her adulthood. Beneath the gentle rituals, though, the first tremors of her inner life began. She learned to contain her feelings, to measure her steps, to read a room before daring to speak. A quiet child already mastering the art of surviving a world that rarely softened for her. Every summer, she returned to her grandfather's ranch in Wyoming, a place breathtaking in its vastness, yet unforgiving in its demands. At 9, she rose before sunrise to carry water, clear stalls choked with dust, and mend fences under a sun that gave no mercy. The ranch made no concessions for her age or size, but in its harshness, Dana discovered an unexpected refuge, a world where effort had meaning, where routine created structure, and where strength was not earned as honor, but required to endure. "The ranch taught me grit," she would recall, but that grit was never a badge of pride. It was simply the way to survive each day. Back in Denver, modest means weighed on Dana like a burden no child should bear, teaching her to take only what she needed and earn everything she hoped for. By her early teens, she rose for pre-dawn shifts at a PBS affiliate and worked late nights at a radio station, learning discipline, patience, and steadiness that would define her. One treasured item, an illustrated children's Bible, vanished during a family move, leaving a hollow ache. Years later, a viewer mailed her the same edition, and the flood of memory hit. The worn pages, familiar illustrations, quiet mornings curled up with it, and she finally let herself cry. "It felt like a piece of my childhood came home," she whispered. A stark reminder that even the strongest adults carry the silent heartbreaks of their earliest years, shaping the resilience they will one day show to the world. Every ounce of order, every shard of discipline, every measure of composure under pressure that America would one day admire was hammered into her here, in these unforgiving landscapes, shaped by work, solitude, and the quiet demands of survival. The silence of a household built on restraint, the dust and labor of her grandfather's ranch, the dim radio booths that demanded early independence. Dana did not become strong because life was easy. She became strong because life required it, early, quietly, consistently. Long before she stood behind the White House podium, Dana Perino had already survived the hardest lesson a child can learn: to stay steady in a world that shifts without warning, to hold herself with grace when no one is there to catch her, and to transform quiet endurance into a force that would one day inspire millions. Every extraordinary journey begins not with victory, but with a crucible of uncertainty, hunger, and relentless effort. Dana Perino's rise in American politics and media began not on the podium of the White House, but in quiet rooms, dimly lit studios, and cold, unfamiliar streets, where she learned that resilience is forged in hardship. After leaving the wide skies of Wyoming and the humble comforts of Denver, Dana entered adulthood, carrying the invisible scars of her childhood. The burden of self-doubt and the constant lesson that to survive, one must first anchor oneself. She learned early to be a peacekeeper, an observer, someone who could remain calm while the world around her changed in unpredictable ways. These skills, though subtle, would become the scaffolding of her career. At university, Dana's life was already a study in brawn and mind. Majoring in mass communications with minors in Spanish and political science, she moved through days and nights that blended classroom lectures with hands-on survival. While her peers wandered through carefree weekends, Dana worked late-night shifts at a radio station. The hum of machinery and the flickering green glow of control boards her only companions. She learned to keep her voice steady when no one was listening, to fill the empty spaces with authority she had yet to claim publicly. By day, she contributed to a tiny PBS station, often alone, setting up cameras, writing scripts, and running tapes, discovering the precise discipline of making stories matter when no one else's attention was guaranteed. Hunger, exhaustion, and doubt became constant companions. There were mornings she had little more than coffee and a borrowed bagel to begin a 12-hour stretch of work. Then came Washington, the gilded capital of power, as cold and indifferent as the Wyoming plains, but far less forgiving. Dana arrived as a quiet staff assistant, answering phones, taking notes, and carrying documents through marble hallways where no one knew her name. She had no family nearby, no backing, no safety net, only a determination forged through years of modest living. Her opportunity came when she became press secretary for Congressman Dan Schaefer. a role far larger than anyone expected for a 5'1" young woman surrounded by seasoned aides twice her age. Reporters tested her, staffers underestimated her, and every press inquiry felt like a small trial by fire. Yet Dana wrote with precision, briefed with clarity, and learned to stay calm under questioning, skills that would one day define her on a national stage. In a city that rewards volume, she built credibility through quiet mastery. In offices where others doubted her, her words proved sharper than their assumptions. Her rise was never fast, but every inch was earned, every step tempered by effort no one ever saw. The first real blow came in 1998, when Congressman Dan Schaefer announced his retirement. The small team that had been Dana's world vanished, almost overnight. At 26, she tasted the raw despair of losing not only a job, but a sense of purpose and belonging. The city that had promised opportunity suddenly became a landscape of uncertainty. It was at this fragile moment, suspended between fear and hope, that she met Peter on a flight, a man older, divorced twice, whose presence promised a personal anchor but led to professional exile. Within 11 months, Dana married and left for England, stepping into a world where her career in journalism and communications vanished, replaced by quiet afternoons in a foreign city, where every street reminded her of what she had left behind. The physical distance mirrored her internal dislocation. The luxury of foreign surroundings could not shield her from the loneliness, the missed opportunities, or the gnawing question of whether she could reclaim the life she had begun in Washington. Yet in the shadows of loss, Dana's resilience deepened. When 9/11 struck, she returned to the United States not as a novice, but as a woman tempered by hunger, exhaustion, isolation, and the raw awareness that the world could shift without warning. Taking up the role of spokesperson at the Department of Justice, she became the calm in a nation's storm, translating personal endurance into public steadiness. Every hardship, every empty studio, every cold night working alone, every moment of professional exile had prepared her to speak, act, and lead when it mattered most. Dana had learned the hardest lesson any child or adult can face: to stand firm, steady, and dignified, even when the world offered no safety, no certainty, and no applause. No one could have predicted that the young woman once lost and adrift in Washington, unemployed at 26, displaced in a foreign city, would one day enter one of the most powerful corridors on the planet. Dana Perino's journey to the West Wing began quietly, without fanfare. In 2002, she joined the Council on Environmental Quality, a role invisible to most, yet essential to the machinery of governance. She learned to navigate sensitive information, to absorb the weight of policy decisions, and to operate where a single misstep could ripple far beyond her desk. These were not glamorous lessons. They were the first whispers of the endurance that would define her tenure at the White House. "This is not glory," she would later recall. "It is the silent grind of nights no one will ever know about." By 2005, at just 33, Dana stepped out from the shadows to become Deputy Press Secretary. Under the mentorship of Tony Snow and Scott McClellan, she suddenly found herself standing in the blaze of a national spotlight, delivering briefings that could shift the temperature of the country in a single breath. Each day, she faced a packed press room, reporters dissecting every syllable, every glance, every heartbeat of silence. The pressure was relentless. The nation was divided. Emotions ran high, and clarity had become a fragile lifeline. Dana, barely 5'1", stood before a wall of cameras with a steadiness that defied her size. What no one saw was the private battle beneath that calm. The first time she rehearsed at the podium, her chest tightened, her palms dampened, and for one sharp, electric moment, she feared her voice might break. But she inhaled, steadied the tremor, and stepped forward anyway. Every answer mattered, she would later reflect, and some days it felt as though I was holding the country together with nothing but my breath, while my own heart was racing. And the moment that would etch itself indelibly into Dana's soul arrived when Tony Snow was diagnosed with cancer. The mentor who had shaped her voice, the steadfast anchor in the relentless swirl of press briefings, suddenly faced mortality. Her carefully constructed world of poise and control became a crucible of grief and duty. Thrust into the unforgiving spotlight, Dana delivered statements she scarcely believed she could voice, hands trembling, heart hammering, every word a tightrope stretched across sorrow and authority. Half her heart ached for Tony, the other half forged into steel for the nation as she learned the ruthless cost of leadership. The world demands composure even when the heart is breaking, courage cloaked in control, while fear gnaws silently beneath. Shadows of loss, the hum of cameras, and the unblinking eyes of the press became the stage where private anguish and public duty collided. In 2007, at 35, when Tony stepped down, Dana became the second female White House press secretary in history. She inherited a role at the fulcrum of power and scrutiny, where every word, every expression, every pause was magnified. The glory of the position came wrapped in exhaustion and constant vigilance. Answering hundreds of reporters daily, navigating crises that shifted by the hour, she bore the nation's gaze while inwardly facing sleepless nights, endless briefings, and gnawing worry over missteps. 7 days a week, often 14 to 16 hours a day, the demands never stopped. Weekends, holidays, and real sleep became luxuries she could rarely afford. Traveling with the president, back-to-back briefings, and relentless media scrutiny steadily wore down both body and mind. Dana's health and emotional reserves were pushed close to their limits. Moments of rest came only in brief, stolen pauses. Moments of clarity often arrived behind locked bathroom doors, where she could breathe freely and respond to urgent emails unseen. She had become, in the words of one colleague, the nation's most trusted voice. Yet at home, the woman Peter knew was often missing, overshadowed by the weight of duty. When January 2009 arrived and Bush's presidency ended, Dana, then 36, left the White House with public acclaim and private scars. 7 years of relentless service had forged a reputation unmatched, yet left behind a landscape of exhaustion, unspoken fears, and memories that haunted the quiet moments. Seeking renewal, she traveled to South Africa for a month of volunteer work, a deliberate retreat to reconcile the triumphs with the cost, to breathe, and to find herself again after years in the crucible of power. "I left with prestige," she reflected, "but also with scars no one saw." Yet the story did not end there. Dana returned to the United States and embarked on a new chapter in national media. Joining Fox News, she became a visible, trusted face to millions of Americans, translating the composure, insight, and authority honed in the White House into nightly broadcasts, interviews, and commentary. Her presence was commanding, yet human. Informed by years of crisis management, her analysis carried the weight of lived experience, not just policy papers. She traveled, lectured, and wrote, her voice shaping public conversation, influencing discourse, and providing a model of integrity and calm to a nation still grappling with uncertainty. The same endurance forged in the hidden corridors of power now shone on screens across the country, turning the woman once adrift into a figure of national influence, respected and admired. Proof that resilience, courage, and dedication can translate into a legacy far beyond any office held. On television, Dina Perino appeared perfect, a woman of calm, intelligence, and unshakable composure. Millions knew her voice, trusted it, relied on it, yet few glimpsed the shadows behind it. The stolen moments for work, the tenderness missed, the choices weighed so carefully that sometimes her heart whispered, "Is it enough?" Just outside the frame stood Peter McMahon, a British businessman 18 years her senior, his story already written in chapters long before Dana arrived. They met in 1997, he 43, she 25, on a flight from Denver to Chicago, unaware that a brief conversation would change their lives. She noticed his wedding ring and assumed he was married. He noticed her focus, gentleness, and curiosity. He carried the weight of 2 previous marriages and grown children. She carried the ambition and ache of a life always in motion. The following year tested their devotion. Long-distance calls, letters across oceans, weekends cut short by work. They chose each other, fully awake, fully tender, defying the distance, the years, and the quiet fears that shadowed them. When they married in 1998, it wasn't a whirlwind, but a vow taken with their eyes wide open. A small, quiet ceremony in South Carolina. Just soft music, a few close friends, and the kind of warmth that comes when nothing is done for show. No Hollywood fairy tale, no grand entrance, just sincerity. Peter had 2 grown children in England, a life Dana would never fully enter, and she never tried to. She simply appeared as a steady, kind presence, offering love without expectation. Yet beneath that warmth lay a quiet truth. The children they never had. As a young woman, Dana had imagined motherhood. "When my career slowed down," she told herself, but a life in politics and media never offered a pause. Days and nights blurred with press conferences, broadcasts, meetings, and crises that spun endlessly. Time passed, invisibly but relentlessly, and the door to having children slowly closed, leaving a persistent ache. There was no hospital drama, no sharp breaking point, just the subtle, piercing awareness that while she had been holding the world together, life had quietly moved on without her. "We don't have kids, so the fridge is always empty," she once joked, a small shield over a longing she carried quietly. A reminder that some doors close not with noise, but with time, ambition, and the decades of work that shaped her 20s and 30s. She never called it regret, only a truth she learned to carry with grace. Love, for Dana and Peter, shifted into different shapes. Henry, their first dog, a gentle beginning. Then Jasper, America's dog, whose presence filled their home with warmth, laughter, and the quiet rhythm of a family built in their own way. Jasper was more than a companion. He was a heartbeat in the house, the echo of joy that might have belonged to children they never had. When Jasper died in 2021, the world saw Dana's tear-streaked face on air, a rare fracture in the armor she wore so carefully. But behind that televised grief was a private devastation. A home suddenly hollow, a silence too large to fit inside the walls. A loss that pressed on her chest like a weight too heavy to name. Percy arrived later, all unfiltered energy and clumsy affection, and though he brought laughter back into the rooms Jasper once filled, the space Jasper left behind remained. Soft, steady, and unforgettable. A reminder that love never leaves without taking a piece of you with it. Through it all, time remained their quiet, relentless antagonist. Dana had stepped firmly into her early 50s, vibrant yet carrying the weight of decades in her spine, while Peter, in his early 70s, bore the unmistakable marks of a life fully lived. Slower rises from chairs, a stiffness in his shoulders, eyes that sometimes lingered on the ceiling as if remembering a lifetime. Nights grew long with quiet worry. There were evenings when Peter fell ill, minor ailments of age made heavier by the decades, and Dana would sit beside him in the dim light, brushing hair from his brow, holding his hand, listening to shallow breaths, counting each one as if the sum total of their days depended on it. In those moments, the full weight of life's fragility pressed down on her. She realized that the years were finite, the mornings numbered, that every small gesture, each laugh, each touch, each whispered word, was a gift borrowed from time itself. She would lie awake beside him, feeling his chest rise and fall, her hand resting on his, her heart tightening with a tenderness that bordered on ache. The bed they shared, warm and familiar, was also a daily confrontation with mortality. One day, perhaps distant, perhaps nearer than she dared acknowledge, only one of them would be there. Loving someone older is a discipline of the soul, a learning to see treasure in the ordinary, to notice the slow ritual of breakfast, the soft sighs after a long day, the shared jokes that need no punchline, the quiet walks along the shore where each footstep is a prayer against the inevitable. Time may erode bodies and dim vigor, but it cannot touch the depth of love cultivated in its shadow, nor the searing ache that proves how precious each fleeting moment truly is. Peter became her unseen anchor, the one who met her White House exhaustion not with questions, but with tea, a steady hand, and quiet listening. And when she faced the glare and fury of cable news, he reminded her that the world inside their home, not the noise outside, was the truth of who she was. Their love grew not from grand gestures, but from small, enduring tenderness. And everything shifted when they moved to Bay Head, where after a lifetime of more than 40 moves, he told her, "I want this to be the last place," turning the girl he once met on a plane into the woman who finally gave him a home. There, life softened into morning walks with Percy. Simple. Dinners and conversations whose meaning came from presence rather than depth. A quiet shaped not by the absence of pain, but by two people learning to live gently with it. Their marriage became a reminder that love need not be perfect to be extraordinary, that a home can feel full without children, that choosing someone older is not sacrifice but devotion, that real commitment is measured not in drama but in constancy, and that love endures not because life is easy, but because they kept choosing each other, even on the hardest days. At 36, as Dana found peace with Peter, the second pillar of her life, Tony Snow, the teacher who taught her how to stand firm, was entering a battle whose pain would reach deep into Dana's heart. Tony Snow, the White House press secretary whose calm, confident demeanor steadied a nation, enters her life not just as a leader, but as a guide, a protector, and a silent beacon of faith in her abilities. To the public, he is a magnetic voice, conducting press conferences with authority and grace. To Dana, he is the first person to see a strength she didn't yet recognize in herself. He teaches her where to stop, how to breathe, how to be steady when the eyes of the world threaten to shatter her composure. He pulled her to the podium before she believed she could stand, whispered encouragement, gently corrected her, and shielded her from the tricky questions that were meant to trap her, preparing her not only for the press, but also for the burden of responsibility that came with being the voice of government. Over those years, their relationship developed into something rarer than teacher and student, a quiet intimacy, a trust that neither office politics nor public scrutiny could shake. Dana later said he was the big brother I never had, who both challenged and protected her, who taught her that discipline could be kind and optimism could be willful. Then, in 2006, life shifted in ways she could not brace for. Toni was diagnosed with colon cancer. The news landed on Dana like a cold weight pressing down on her chest. The man who had been her anchor grew thinner, slower, his energy dimmed, yet still insisting on carrying light for others. She watched him in private, unseen by cameras. The slight tremor in his hands, the way he exhaled with effort before briefings, the fatigue veiled behind a practiced smile. Dana memorized every nuance, the tilt of his head when considering a question, the gentle encouragement before she approached the podium, the warmth in his voice assuring her she could meet any challenge. When treatment forced him to step back in 2007, she faced the glare of the press alone. Every briefing was an act of courage, a silent mourning, a testing of herself against the absence of the man who had taught her to stand tall. She confided later, "I wanted him there more than anything. My heart raced not from fear, but from longing." In July 2008, the world lost Toni. Cancer had returned with a ferocity that allowed no warning. Dana's grief was private, profound, impossible to broadcast. She waited until doors closed before letting the tears fall, rewriting her tribute over and over, each line breaking under the weight of memories. The loss was not simply a mentor gone, it was a brother, a protector, a foundation removed. The anchor she had relied on to steady her career and her courage was suddenly absent, leaving her to navigate a world that demanded composure while her heart carried the ache of someone irreplaceable. Toni had not only departed from life, he had carried with him the certainty she had leaned on, the confidence she had borrowed, the lessons that had shaped her every step, leaving a silent void both terrifying and instructive. And yet, from that void, Dana discovered a new depth. Toni's voice became her compass, his lessons her shield. Every calm breath she took at the podium, every patient word of guidance she offered to others, carried his echo. The grief carved into her consciousness became the forge in which her resilience was tempered. The fragility she witnessed in him taught her to recognize fragility in others, to lead with both compassion and strength. Every achievement that followed, the composure she displayed on Fox News, the mentorship she gave to young communicators, the integrity with which she authored her books, bore the invisible imprint of Toni Snow. In the quiet of her mind, his presence endured, unwavering, luminous, guiding. Behind the lights of the press briefing room is a heart that was once broken, Dana might reflect. And it is those very cracks that have created the depth that America sees in me today. Now, at 53, Dana Perino stands in a chapter of life that looks peaceful from the outside. A calm earned only by a woman who has walked through storms most people never see. Her estimated net worth of $6 million is not a symbol of luxury, but the quiet accumulation of decades spent rising before dawn, surviving the furnace of national politics, anchoring the country through moments of uncertainty, and turning discipline into destiny. It is the kind of success built slowly, deliberately, by someone who started with nothing but grit and transformed a life of modest beginnings into a legacy of influence, integrity, and unshakable purpose. Her world today centers in Bay Head, New Jersey, in a home that isn't a trophy of success, but a refuge carved from years of unrest. Sunlight spills through wide windows, the salt breeze drifts in like a soft reminder that life can finally slow down, and every corner of the house holds a story etched in quiet resilience. There are no marble proclamations of wealth, no glossy indulgences meant to impress. Instead, The elegance lives in the subtleties. Shelves lined with books filled with her handwritten notes from decades in public service. Paintings of Jasper and Percy that feel like portraits of family. Small gifts from viewers who felt understood by her voice. And photographs frozen in time. Moments of crisis survived, miles traveled, and victories no headline ever fully captured. The home isn't the largest, nor the most expensive, but it is something Dana never had before. A place that doesn't feel temporary. For two people who spent half their lives in airport lounges, government buildings, temporary housing, and borrowed spaces, Bay Head is not a luxury. It is a landing. It is the exhale after years of inhaling too much responsibility. And true to who she is, Dana's sense of wealth has never come from objects. She keeps a single classic watch, wears jewelry chosen more for meaning than price, and drives a car that is reliable rather than glamorous. She has never needed excess to feel accomplished. Her luxury now is quieter, more profound. Mornings that begin with the rhythm of the ocean instead of breaking news alerts. Evenings spent under the warm glow of the kitchen lights instead of cameras. The profound, steady comfort of knowing that every part of her life, this house, this peace, this calm, was built not by privilege, but by endurance, grit, and the refusal to break. Her days with Peter now unfold to a rhythm almost sacred, walking the shoreline with Percy darting ahead, waves brushing their ankles, voices mingling with the wind, sometimes discussing the news, sometimes nothing at all. At home, dinners are shared quietly, the clatter of plates and soft laughter a treasure after years of relentless intensity. To viewers accustomed to seeing her polished under studio lights, it is almost unbearably tender to picture the same woman barefoot in her kitchen, stirring a pot of soup, laughing with the man who had moved more than 40 times before finally saying, "I want this to be our last stop." Yet even in this softened chapter, shadows linger. The White House years etched into her muscle memory. 3 a.m. calls that still send her heart racing. The instinctive brace whenever a headline shatters the calm. The invisible weight of decisions that once held a nation's gaze. And there is a quieter ache she carries without dramatics, the hollow of a life without children. Not a tragedy, but the consequence of timing, of decades surrendered to service, to duty, to a job that demanded everything and gave little in return. She has learned to bear this truth with grace, yet it leaves a thin, almost invisible layer of fragility beneath the unshakable figure the world admires. Yet Dana has never allowed loss to define her. She transforms it. She pours her generosity into people, mentoring young journalists, coaching students, speaking to communities who rarely have access to national voices. Through her books, including Everything Will Be Okay and the Good News Is, she has quietly directed a portion of the proceeds to educational programs and animal welfare groups, honoring the compassion that shaped her. She also supports Mercy Ships, the global nonprofit providing life-saving surgeries around the world, a mission she and Peter have championed both financially and through hands-on involvement. And as one of the leading voices at Fox News Media, Dana has contributed to network charity drives that have collectively raised over $30 million for causes ranging from veterans' support to children's health. Jasper's passing in 2021 deepened her commitment to animal protection, turning grief into action that now lives through Percy, through donations, through comfort she offers to viewers who loved Jasper as fiercely as she did. Professionally, she stands in her prime. On the 5 in America's newsroom, Dana remains one of the most trusted and balanced voices on American television. Her clarity shaped not by volume, but by decades of lived experience, discipline, and the unshakable calm she learned to carry when the world was anything but calm. And through it all, Peter remains the quiet constant, the steady center of her universe. After years of distance, age gaps, health scares, political storms, criticism from strangers, and private heartbreaks, their marriage endures because it is built not on perfection, but on choosing each other, deliberately, faithfully, every single day. In Bay Head, they have created something both fragile and invincible, a life anchored in gratitude. As Dana steps into the next decade, continuing her broadcasts, writing new books, championing young voices, she carries a truth forged across continents, losses, victories, and healing. Strength does not always roar. Sometimes strength is a quiet, steady light that outlives every storm. If her story stirs your heart, sparks reflection, or lights a quiet fire of inspiration, let a like be your tribute to the woman who rose from humble beginnings to become a steadfast voice guiding millions through storms. Golden American Stars wishes you and your loved ones peace in your heart, health in your body, joy in your days, and abundance in wealth, in opportunities, and in love. May your journey be bright, your burdens light, and your future filled with moments worth holding on to.